My name is Bonnie, and I am 58 years old. For 30 years, I built an empire from nothing. 200 properties across 3 states, millions in revenue every single year. But here is the thing. Nobody knows it is mine. I chose to stay invisible, to live simply, to let others take the spotlight. I thought that was wisdom, until my son's wife stood up at a family dinner and called me a useless burden who needed to know her place. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Because what I did next changed everything. I grew up in a small house on the outskirts of Chicago. My father fixed pipes for a living. He would come home every night with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. My mother worked at the dry cleaners down the street, pressing other people's clothes for minimum wage. We never had much, but we had enough. And my parents taught me something that money cannot buy. They taught me that hard work and integrity matter more than appearances. I put myself through college on scholarships and 3 part-time jobs. I cleaned office buildings at night. I waited tables on weekends. I tutored high school kids in between classes. By the time I graduated, I was so tired I could barely see straight. But I had a degree in business and a fire in my belly that nothing could extinguish. At 28 years old, I scraped together every penny I had saved over 10 years. It was not much, just enough to put a down payment on a run-down duplex on the south side of Chicago. Everyone told me I was crazy, a young woman buying property in that neighborhood. But I saw something they did not. I saw potential. I spent every weekend for 6 months fixing that place up with my own 2 hands. I learned how to patch drywall. I learned how to replace faucets. I learned how to refinish hardwood floors. When I finally sold it, I made a profit of $12,000. That does not sound like much now, but back then, it was everything. It was proof that my idea could work. I took that money and bought another property, then another, then another. I hired my first employee when I was 32. By 35, I had a team of 10 people and a portfolio of 20 properties. That was when I officially formed Sterling Properties. I named it after my mother's maiden name because she was the one who taught me that a woman could do anything she set her mind to. The company grew faster than I ever imagined. We expanded from residential to commercial real estate. We moved into retail spaces, office buildings, apartment complexes. By the time I was 45, Sterling Properties was worth over $50 million. Today, we own more than 200 properties across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Our annual revenue exceeds $30 million, and I own 65% of it all. But here is the part that surprises people. Nobody knows it is mine. When the company started getting attention from the press, I panicked. I have never liked being in the spotlight. I hate cocktail parties and business dinners. I despise giving interviews and posing for photographs. I am not shy, exactly. I just value my privacy more than my ego. So I asked my younger brother Walter to be the face of the company. Walter is everything I am not. He is charming and charismatic. He loves networking and public speaking. He thrives in boardrooms and at galas. He was perfect for the role of CEO. On paper, Walter runs Sterling Properties. He gives the interviews. He attends the conferences. He shakes the hands. But behind closed doors, every major decision goes through me. I am the chairwoman of the board. I hold the majority shares through a private holding company that bears a different name. Only a handful of people know the truth. Walter, of course. My lawyer, Margaret, who has been my best friend since college. And a few longtime board members who were there from the beginning. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house that I bought 20 years ago. I drive a 10-year-old sedan that still runs perfectly fine. I wear clothes from regular department stores. I do not own designer handbags or expensive jewelry. If you saw me on the street, you would never guess I was worth what I am worth. And that is exactly how I like it. My son Derek is 34 years old now. I raised him alone after his father walked out when Derek was just 5. Those early years were brutal. I was building a company and raising a child at the same time. There were nights when I would put Derek to bed and then stay up until 3 in the morning reviewing contracts. There were weekends when I wanted nothing more than to collapse. But I took him to the park instead because he needed his mother. I never told Derek the full truth about our finances. I wanted him to grow up with a work ethic, not a sense of entitlement. He knew I worked in real estate. He knew I did well enough to pay for his education. But he had no idea that I owned the company he eventually came to work for. Derek joined Sterling Properties right out of college. He started at the bottom, just like everyone else. He was a property assistant, then a leasing agent, then a property manager. He worked his way up through talent and determination, not because of his last name. I was so proud of him. When he was promoted to vice president of operations 3 years ago, it was because he earned it. Then he met Kristen. It was at a company networking event. Kristen worked in our marketing department. She was 28 at the time, beautiful and ambitious. I noticed her before Derek did. She had a way of scanning every room she entered, assessing who was important and who was not. When she saw Derek, something clicked in her eyes. I recognized it immediately. It was calculation. They started dating 2 weeks later. The relationship moved fast. Too fast, in my opinion. Within 6 months, Derek was talking about marriage. I tried to express my concerns gently, but Derek accused me of being overprotective. Maybe I was. Or maybe a mother knows things that logic cannot explain. The wedding was a year later. It was beautiful and expensive. Kristen wanted everything perfect. The flowers had to be imported. The venue had to be exclusive. The guest list had to include certain people who would be impressed. I paid for most of it quietly, funneling money through Derek, so Kristen would not ask questions. I just wanted my son to be happy. But from the very beginning, I could feel Kristen watching me with a certain look in her eyes. It was not hostility, exactly. It was more like dismissal, like I was a piece of furniture that came with the marriage but did not quite fit her aesthetic. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself to give her a chance. After all, she was my son's wife now. She was family. I had no idea how wrong I was about everything. The first real sign came about a month after the wedding. Derek and Kristen came over for dinner at my house. I had spent all day cooking. Pot roast with vegetables, homemade mashed potatoes, fresh bread from the bakery down the street. I wanted to welcome my new daughter-in-law properly. Kristen walked through my front door and stopped in the foyer. She looked around at the modest living room, the older furniture, the family photographs on the walls. Her expression shifted into something I can only describe as disappointment. She leaned toward Derek and whispered something. "I was in the kitchen, but I have good hearing," she said, and I quote, "Why does your mother live like this? I thought she worked at that big real estate company." Derek mumbled something about me preferring simple things. Kristen laughed quietly. "Simple," she said. "Or maybe she just cannot afford anything better." I stood there in my kitchen, holding a wooden spoon, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I told myself to let it go. She did not know me yet. She did not understand. Dinner was awkward. Kristen dominated the conversation, talking about her plans to climb the corporate ladder at Sterling Properties. She mentioned her ideas for rebranding, her strategies for market expansion, her vision for the company's future. She spoke as if she were already running the place. At one point, she turned to me and asked what I did at Sterling Properties. I said I worked in administration, handling paperwork mostly. She nodded slowly, her eyes flickering with something like pity. "That must be nice," she said. "Low stress, I imagine. Perfect for someone your age." I smiled and changed the subject. But inside, I was beginning to understand exactly who my daughter-in-law was. Things got worse over the following months. Kristen started throwing her weight around at the office. She demanded a larger office space, claiming her current one was not suitable for someone in her position. She requested a personal assistant, even though her role did not justify one. She began making decisions that were above her pay grade, approving vendors, and signing off on campaigns without proper authorization. My assistant Helen, who officially works for Walter, but reports everything to me, kept me informed. She told me that Kristen was telling people she would be running the company someday, that when Derek inherited everything from his uncle Walter, she would be right there beside him as the real power behind the throne. I listened to these reports with a mixture of disbelief and sadness. Kristen had no idea that Walter did not own the company. She had no idea that there was nothing to inherit from him. She had constructed an entire fantasy in her head, and she was living in it fully. I asked Helen if Derek knew about his wife's behavior. Helen said she was not sure, but Kristen seemed very confident, as if she had her husband's full support. I chose not to intervene. Not yet. I told myself it was not my place to interfere in my son's marriage. I told myself that Kristen would eventually learn her limits. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. Then came my 60th birthday. I do not make a big deal out of birthdays. I never have. But 60 felt significant somehow. 6 decades on this planet. I thought maybe Derek would want to celebrate with me. Nothing fancy. Just dinner together, maybe a movie, some quality time. Derek called me that morning. He sounded apologetic before he even spoke. "Mom," he said, "I am so sorry, but Kristen booked us a spa weekend. I completely forgot about your birthday. Can we celebrate next week instead?" I told him, of course, it was fine, not to worry about it. I spent my 60th birthday alone, eating leftover soup and watching old movies on television. I told myself it was not a big deal. I told myself I did not mind. But a week later, I saw the photographs on social media. Kristen's birthday party at an upscale restaurant downtown. There was Derek sitting beside her, surrounded by her friends, champagne glasses raised in celebration. The date on the post was my birthday, the exact same day. Kristen had not booked a spa weekend. She had thrown herself a birthday party and made Derek attend instead of seeing his mother. I stared at those photographs for a long time. I counted the candles on her cake. 31. Her birthday was not even close to mine. She had simply decided her celebration mattered more. I called Margaret that night and told her everything. Margaret was furious. She said I needed to put Kristen in her place immediately. She said I was being too passive, too forgiving, too willing to be walked over. I told her I did not want to cause problems between Derek and his wife. I told her I just wanted peace in the family. Margaret sighed heavily. "Bonnie," she said, "there is no peace when someone is treating you like dirt. There is only your dignity, slowly eroding while you pretend not to notice. She was right, but I was not ready to admit it yet. The situation escalated 2 months later. I received an unexpected visit from Kristen at my home. She came alone without Derek, which immediately put me on alert. She sat down in my living room and looked around with that familiar expression of disdain. Then she got straight to the point. "Mom," she said, and the word sounded strange, coming from her mouth. "Derek and I have been talking. We think you should consider selling this house." I asked her why I would do that. She leaned forward, speaking slowly, as if I might have trouble understanding. "This neighborhood is not what it used to be. Property values are declining. Crime rates are going up. It is not safe for a woman your age to live alone in a place like this." I pointed out that I had lived here for 20 years without incident. She waved her hand dismissively. "That is exactly the problem. You have been here too long. You cannot see how things have changed." She paused, then delivered what she clearly thought was the clincher. "Besides, if you sold this place, you could use the money to take care of yourself. You would not have to worry about being a burden on Derek and me." I felt the words land like small stones against my chest. A burden. She thought I was a burden. I asked her calmly what she meant by that. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I just mean that Derek worries about you. Living alone on a fixed income in a house that probably needs more maintenance than you can handle." She shrugged. "We thought maybe a small apartment would be more suitable. Something near us, so we could keep an eye on you." I understood then exactly what was happening. Kristen saw me as a poor old woman who was going to drain resources that she believed should go to her and Derek. She wanted me tucked away somewhere small and manageable, out of sight and out of mind. I told her I would think about it. She seemed satisfied with that answer and left shortly after. But I was not thinking about selling my house. I was thinking about how far things had gone without me noticing. I was thinking about my son, who apparently sat in on these conversations, about relocating his mother, and said nothing in my defense. A week later, Helen called me with news that made my blood run cold. She said Kristen had been having private conversations with several board members. Kristen had been suggesting that Walter should consider retiring early due to his age. She had been implying that Derek was ready to take over as CEO, and that such a transition would be good for the company's image. Kristen did not know that those board members knew exactly who I was. They had worked with me for decades. They were my friends and allies, and they found Kristen's maneuvering both amusing and offensive. Thomas, one of the longest-serving board members, called me directly. "Bonnie," he said, "I thought you should know what your daughter-in-law has been up to." He told me everything. The private meetings Kristen had requested, the hints she had dropped about Walter's declining relevance, the vision she had painted of Derek as the young, dynamic leader Sterling Properties needed. And then Thomas told me the worst part. He said Kristen had been talking about me too. She described me to board members as Derek's elderly mother, who worked some low-level job in the office. She said I was an embarrassment, a poor old woman who could not even afford a decent house. She actually used the phrase, "And I will never forget this," she said. "I was like a charity case. The company kept around out of pity." I thanked Thomas and hung up the phone. Then I sat in my kitchen for over an hour, staring at the wall. 30 years. I had built this company from nothing. I had sacrificed sleep and relationships and peace of mind. I had created something that employed hundreds of people and generated millions of dollars. And my son's wife was telling people I was a charity case. That night, I asked Derek to come over without Kristen. I needed to talk to him alone. He arrived looking nervous, as if he knew something was wrong. We sat in the living room, the same room where I used to read him bedtime stories when he was small. I asked him directly, "Do you know what your wife has been saying about me to people at the company?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Mom," he said, "Kristen is just trying to help. She has ideas about the company's future. She wants what is best for everyone." I asked if he knew she was campaigning to have Walter removed. He nodded slowly. "She thinks it might be time for new leadership. Uncle Walter is getting older, and I have been there for years now. It makes sense for me to step up." I asked him what Kristen thought of me. Derek could not meet my eyes. "She just wants to make sure you are taken care of. She worries about you living alone, about your finances." I felt something break inside me. My own son had been listening to his wife describe me as poor and burdensome, and he had said nothing to correct her. He had simply accepted it. I told him I understood. I said he should go home to his wife. After he left, I cried for the first time in years. Not because of Kristen, because of Derek, because the son I had raised alone, the son I had sacrificed everything for, had become someone who would let his mother be disrespected without a word of defense. The breaking point came 3 weeks later at a dinner I will never forget. Derek called to invite me to a celebration at an upscale restaurant downtown. He said it was for their 3rd wedding anniversary. I was hesitant, but he insisted. He said it would